The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines. Welcome back. I'm Tian Wei. This is World Insight. This week, M+, a new visual art institution, opens in Hong Kong's West Kowloon Cultural District. Many believe it is one of the most significant moments for Hong Kong today to serve as a window for the world on Chinese culture. Swiss collector Uli Sigg has been contributing to the founding of M+ every step of the way by putting not only his time and energy, but also donating his largest collection of Chinese contemporary art to the museum. On the eve of M+ opening and the exhibit of the Sigg collection there, I talked to him about the exhibit, about Hong Kong, Chinese contemporary art, and of course, China. Dr. Sigg, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Well, the pleasure is all mine.
Well, this time in a very different location, inside M+, in front of your collection.
Well, it's a part, say, what we can see. Within my kind of, but it's now the M+ Sigg collection.
Mm-hmm. So how big is this collection?
The M+ Sigg collection is about 1,500 pieces of Chinese contemporary art by about 300 Chinese artists.
And behind you, we see an interesting work. Would you like to use that as an example, just to show, how your collection, particularly in M+, is trying to tell the story of China in a way from your own perspective?
Well, this work is actually an abstract work. It's by a female Chinese artist. And what she did, she took a textile pattern she found in the household of her mother. And she used this as a trigger point and started to construct this surface we see. What we cannot see is it's a progression from very bright to dark. And then she incises the ornament, and then in a third step paint color in this ornament. It's a very complex process. It's about really emptying herself on the canvas and all that. So that's just one example.
Dr. Sigg, some say M+, of course, is a very important art institution now in Hong Kong. With its opening very soon, many say it could even rival the Central Pompidou or, Tate Modern. What is your assessment of the necessity of this art institution in Hong Kong? And of course, your collection inside.
I think it's a very good thing for Hong Kong. And I think there has been a need for a world-class institution which can, as you just said, keep up with anything in the world. And a city of that importance, and with that stream of incoming visitors, as it always had, a city like that, even point of city marketing, then point of art marketing, and then of course for the public of Hong Kong, who ultimately pays for the museum, there is a real need for this institution.
When you talk about your collection, how do you select this more than 1,000 pieces into the permanent collection of M+?
It was a careful choice, but it was done by myself. Chose according to my intention and that of the museum as well, to show the storyline of Chinese contemporary art. From its very beginnings, we can date that around 79, to today, or maybe as the donation was in 2012, as to 2012.
Tell me more about what does that mean to be
submerge yourself into the world of Chinese contemporary art and interacting, as a person with the artists that are in this scene, to you, what does it say to you? What have you learned?
Well, I had been very ignorant about China when I came to China end of the 70s. So later, yes, things moved up, and I could do that. And so I could go out and reach the artists and talk to them. I could see how they live. And through contemporary art, I really experienced, other parts of China.
Did you have a favorite or favorites to visit? Tell us one or two of those anecdotes.
Well, it was a large crowd I met, and one artist would take me to another artist, and at first I had to find them, and then very soon they found me. And also I invited many into the embassy, and so we could have easy conversations, and I also could invite other guests who took an interest in contemporary art. And so the circle widened and widened, and still my ultimate study object is China. So through encountering the artist, I did really my China research, you could say. I researched it through my business experience, I researched it through diplomacy, and I researched it through encounter with Chinese contemporary artists and art. So it was kind of instrumental to do this.
When you talk about research, of course, there's a lot of, cliche sayings. You're saying if you're in China for a month, you could almost write a book about China. But when you are here for 1 year or more than that, people would get scared, suggesting, what China is like. That question, I'm sure, have been popping up to you anytime you talk to a non-Chinese audience about what China is and, how to interpret China now. What would you say?
Well, I fear a question like this one. What I normally say, it sounds like I'm escaping the question, but for me, it's the truth. In China, you find everything and the contrary of everything. Something of that type. I really think that's about an adequate way of describing China.
There's a speed about China. There's also reminiscence among the Chinese. Just on this specific point, how would you interpret that? How do you also articulate those trends with your artist friends?
Well, one issue that was important to me is, of course, the Chinese tradition, the Chinese culture, and how the contemporary people and artists are just some of the contemporary people in China, how they deal with their own tradition, how do they understand their tradition? Is it, as one would expect, something to pass on to the next generations? Is it something to think anew? And so I did, for instance, exhibition about Shangshui, about Chinese traditional landscape painting, how contemporary artists view that tradition. I did another large exhibition about calligraphy. How do Chinese contemporary artists see that tradition? Of course, I had to prepare it for a Western public because these exhibitions were in the West. And this was a very important learning, first of all, for me, but also for these visitors, and sometimes for the Chinese as well. For instance, about script, questions like how many Chinese characters are in your smartphone? I didn't find anyone who could answer this in China. How do they get into your smart device? Who is going to define them? Issues like that. Very interesting in today's China. So I could do a lot of research, say, in an art exhibition, just to make an example.
That's one way of looking at it. But the other way of looking at it is look at some of important timing. For example, this year, China celebrates 20th anniversary of China's succession to the WTO. You know very well, Dr. Sigg, that's a very significant event for China. This year also, China is going to host coming year rather, going to host the Winter Olympic Games. You also knew very well 2008 Beijing Games, what it meant for China and the Chinese. So when you look at the time of the evolution of time and events, how do you see, that is being reflected in the collection of works from Chinese artists? What have been their takeaways about different times and also the evolution of Chinese thinking?
These events, they all found some, or shall we put it this way, there are traces of all these things in Chinese contemporary art. Of course, things of actuality need some time to mature and to kind of coagulate in an artwork. If they are produced in heat, and very fast in an event, for instance, then they are mainly documentary. That's not so interesting. So normally they need to sink in an artist's mind, and they need to be brooding and conflicting, and then it takes time for a meaningful artwork to exist. But all these events produced something of interest, but in a first wave, it's just very documentary. But then very interesting artworks come out, but we would need to have images. It's very difficult to put this in words.
Can you give us one or two examples that you think might help you to explain this?
One good example of what you have been enumerating is the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. And there is a work I like very much of the stadium, although still under construction. It's done with the pinhole camera. It's done out of a darkroom, actually without any camera. It's in a room, and the window is completely closed, and then there is a hole of like 5 millimeters in this wall window, and that's where the image kind of penetrates on the photo paper, which is on the back of the wall, very large, many meters. And it takes hours for this image to slowly build. So that's one example, a very interesting manifestation of the Bird's Nest Stadium and of the Olympics in a way. And probably we will see more after the Winter Olympics, I assume. And I love to go skiing there. Every year I used to go and ski, but this year probably will be more difficult.
When China is developing, people have been asking the question about what real China is and what China desires. I'm sure those questions also pop up in many of the press conferences and the Q&A sessions you had with many others about this exhibition, particularly in recent years. So Dr. Sigg, when people go inside this exhibition, go inside M+, what kind of open mind should they have?
I think they, in a way, need an open mind, because the contemporary art is, somewhat different from, say, the traditional art. So the contemporary artists, they are actually visual thinkers. And so one has to be prepared to see different views, different opinions on subjects. And also, it's not like in the tradition where it's very much about beauty, harmony, the sublime, which is a very good thing. Art is your good friend. In contemporary art is made in another paradigm. It may be critical, it may be very analytical and all that. So one has to be prepared to see some of that, but there's also a lot of beauty. And there's many things that connect to the great Chinese tradition, which is unmatched by and different from any other. I mean, I'm saying that as a European. And you find all of that in such an exhibition, because it's a very large exhibition, about 300 works.
Dr. Sigg, since M+ is in Hong Kong and it's being regarded as one of the most important art institutions in Hong Kong's contemporary time, one has to ask the question about Hong Kong. There were some ups and downs in Hong Kong over the past few years. how do you as an art collector see that part of time? And how do you think that's going to, or already having an impact on your determination to work closely with M+?
Of course, a major change is the national security law. And of course, you know, like in every jurisdiction, this is a norm we have to observe and obey. And I think that's okay with the museum. The law is not necessarily tailored to art. And but so far, I must stress, we have not have had interference with this work list we have composed before the national security law.
So finally, before we go, Dr. Sigg, it might be difficult for all of us to travel to Hong Kong this year. However, there is opportunity in the future. So when you suggest us to visit M+ and your collection, where should we run to first?
Well, first, you know, the museum shows a number of exhibitions at the same time. You know, there is Southeast Asian art, there is design, there is architecture. But I would always recommend to run first in the M+SIG galleries and look first at the Chinese contemporary art. So yeah, that would be my very short advertisement claim.
Dr. Uli Sigg, always a pleasure, and congratulations. All the best to the opening. That's Dr. Uli Sigg, the largest collector of Chinese contemporary art in the world, talking to me about the opening of M+ in Hong Kong. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.